Good evening, everybody. Bonsoir tout le monde. So the conference tonight is about enhancing creativity. So probably a lot of people at home or people here have done a lot of Feldenkrais now by this conference, and you might be wondering how we're going to connect these movement lessons to creativity. I often think of creative people. How do they describe the creative process? And we might have somebody like Stravinsky who says when he wrote Le Sacre that he heard it and he wrote what he heard, and he was just a vessel for the Sacre. I also think sometimes of Tom Waits, who said he was driving in his car along the highway and suddenly had these incredible melodies in his head and fantastic lyrics, the best song ever. And he was scrambling to get some papers and to write it down, and he stopped on the side of the road and looked up and like, "Can't you see I'm driving?" So you wonder, how does the creative process come about? And we can see it in our language, in the words we use. Oh, I stumbled upon an idea, a thought came to me. And there's an ambiguity about what creativity is. Is it something we learn, or are we born with it? When we see kids, they seem pretty creative. Is it something we unlearn? How does it happen? Is it something we can learn again, or we can improve? So maybe I'll give the audience and everybody a first little riddle for this evening, so you can all test your creativity. So here you've got a box with some push pins and some matches and a candle. And I would like you, during the conference, to see if you can solve this riddle. The riddle is the following. With only these items, could you fix the candle onto a wall, making sure that it wouldn't burn the wall and it wouldn't drop any wax onto the floor or the table below? Is it clear? I'll say it again. You only have these items. This is a psychological test. You only have this. And you have to figure out a way that you can put this candle, fix it on the wall, making sure that you don't burn down the house or burn the wall, but also making sure that you don't drip any wax on the floor. So think about it, and we'll come back to it later. So for this evening, I think a person who is very well placed to talk about creativity is our guest, and tonight it's Alain Kestel. He's been teaching Feldenkrais for decades, and he's been teaching thousands of people and organizing more than 20 trainings around the world, around the globe, and creating a lot of different programs around different themes and also about creativity. And so we'll start the evening with Alain Kestel, and he'll give us an introduction to how we can improve the process of creativity. Welcome.
So, thank you very much, and thank all of you for coming tonight, and all the people at home watching. I'm happy to be talking to you as well. It's funny because I've been teaching in English with a French translator, so I keep hearing myself pause. But I'll try to just talk straight through right now. And now you want me to talk about creativity, the idea of enhancing creativity. And the way that Nikos talked about it in terms of Tom Waits and who was the other one? Stravinsky, that's what Stravinsky. I'll speak about that a little later in terms of the expectation we have about someone who seems creative like that. But more importantly, I'm interested in what each of us can do ourselves concretely to become more creative. But first I have a question for all of you, and you can just raise your hand to answer. So the question is, are you creative? So I see three things. One thing is some people just raise their hand. Some people raise their hand and kind of look around a little bit. And some people, they just look down. So that's a challenge for us, isn't it? Because we have ideas about creativity, but do we really know what it is? What can we explore concretely to help us become more creative? So I have another question for you. Do you know someone who you think is really creative? So everyone raises their hand there, right? So what's the difference? What's the difference between someone who you think of as creative and yourself maybe? Or that person and other people? And as I understand it, I've only found one significant difference between the people who I think are really creative compared to myself, and that is they see choices that I didn't see. So I come to someone's house, and the light fixture is a Chinese parasol that's placed upside down, and it's so beautiful looking, and first I'm awed at it maybe to some degree, and then my next experience is like, I never would have thought of that. That's the thing we think of the most when we see something creative, but we couldn't come up with that idea. Now, I'm here to promote the Feldenkrais method as a resource for creativity. So one of the basic tenets in the Feldenkrais method is that we're not teaching the right or the wrong way to do anything. What we're teaching is more choice. So depending on the context you're in, who you're with, how you feel that day, the time of day, all of those things will determine the kind of choices that we make. So then it becomes a question of how can we start to generate choices? And this is something that the Feldenkrais method helps us do, but not in the most overt, direct way like we might think about, okay, I'm going to take a Feldenkrais class to become more creative. No, it's not going to happen like that. What happens is you'll be doing movements that actually teach you something, choices that you can make in your own movement, and it's not a conscious process of thinking, oh, now I'm being creative. You're just starting to generate choices. And one of the beauties of doing it in awareness through movement is that it's outside of the everyday context of trying to achieve something. Because if we try to achieve creativity, I think we have a problem for a long time, right? But if we're in some environment where choice is somehow generated through listening with ourselves, through moving in different ways, that we discover things that we didn't know about before, that's a different way. It's kind of like the back door of coming towards creativity. Now, we have, since you're all sitting, I thought I'd show you a picture of a chair. It's quite elegant. I'm not sure how comfortable it is, but it says something about it. And of course, we can look at something like that and think, well, whomever made that is pretty creative in some way, because I know I wouldn't have thought of something like that. But sitting is a big part of what we do. So I'm imagining that most people here and at home are near a chair, or could be sitting, so sit. Everybody sit and feel, what do you notice in your sitting? So I'm going to take you, not through a full awareness through movement lesson, but through some basic ideas that can help maybe generate an understanding of what happens in a lesson, specifically to the point of making choices. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about something else. So before I did Feldenkrais, I was an actor. And I had the experience that was one of the best moments for me to understand creativity as an actor, although I couldn't describe it or name it at first. So I had, in my acting conservatory, I usually had some pretty good-sized parts. And then they cast for The Seagull by Anton Chekhov, and I got the part of Yakov. Now, even if you know The Seagull, you probably don't know the part of Yakov because he only has 6 lines. It was the smallest part I ever had. And in the play, Yakov is building a stage for a play within the play, and at the same time, Masha and Medvedenko are having a conversation at the front of the stage. And they're talking about something, and at some point, I'm supposed to interrupt them. So, I'm standing back there, and I hear my cue, and I go running out like I'm chasing a bee, right? And they turn around and are kind of shocked, and that interruption happens. And then, of course, the scene goes on, and the scene starts again, and I'm back behind the stage at that point, and I'm waiting for my cue, and I start tapping on something, because I'm building a stage, and then all of a sudden I go, ow! And I go running out, holding my thumb like I hit my thumb with a hammer. And now, Masha and Medvedenko are kind of like, huh? Because they just saw me come out chasing a bee. Now I'm coming out with a totally different intention. And then they go through the whole scene again, and my cue comes again, And now I come out laughing my head off like I heard the funniest joke in the world. I see them, I stop, I get embarrassed, and they're even more puzzled. Now at this point, the director got more interested in me than Masha and Medvedenko. So we started running the scene right before my entrance. And I would do things like I was chasing something, an animal or something, and I kept coming up with more choices about how I could make that entrance. And the thing was, that was really the first time I felt really creative. Now, it was easy because there was no importance to that role. I had no pressure on me to be good in any way, in any significant way. And I found that that was the beginning of me being able to generate choices no matter what the character was that I was playing. I also had the opportunity to teach in an acting school in New York called the New Actors Workshop, and one of the teachers was a famous director named Mike Nichols. And I was sitting in one of his classes, and I heard him say that his favorite actors and actresses to work with were Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep. Why? Because they came in with so many choices. So this is the foundation of what I think is to generate our ability to become more creative in any aspect of our life. So back to our movement here. So if you sit more at the edge of your chair, and for those of you who are sitting more on the floor, you're going to have to find a way to stand up, but that's okay. You'll do it as you're able to. Now, one of the ways that we can look at these ideas is to see, can we come to standing in different ways? So first, just come to standing, and sit again. And you can do that a few times. And of course, that's probably most representative of each of our habits, the way we explore things and do things. And sit again. And now, come to standing in a poor way. Don't do it well. Oh, that's pretty good, actually, some of you. Can you do it worse? Okay, sit again, and now come to stand really well. It's not much different. What do I say? No, it's plenty different. It's plenty different. So now you have three experiences of coming up to standing. And those are the general choices that we have. We do something without thinking about it, we do it well, or we do it poorly, right? And that really isn't enough. So let's see if we can find some more ways. So the next time you stand, see if you can do it by pushing your feet into the floor. And do that a few times and notice, does that provide you with a different experience of how you feel, what you notice, what you sense? And then sit again. And now, this next time you come to stand, see if you can do it just by lifting your bottom into the air. And as I look at the people here, people look different. So something changes in the way you use yourself when you initiate the movement in a different way. Sit again, and now this time, see if you can come to standing by lengthening the back of your neck. Different? Looks different. So now, is one of those more correct than the other? No. It's not about finding the right way to do something, it's about generating more choices. But right now, the only thing we've been playing with is the idea of initiation. So let's see if we can have another way of learning to come to stand from a different point of view. So the next time you stand, you're going to stand as if there's this delicious smell somewhere out in front of you. So go ahead and stand like that. Now everyone's smiling. That's different already. Sit down again. And do that a few times. Think that it's generated by your interest in smelling something that's nearby. And now sit. And now this time, imagine that you see a child getting too close to a heater. and stand. Whoa, yeah. That makes a big difference, does it? Do it again. Okay? Can you feel the whole way you bring yourself to the act of going from sitting to standing changes completely? Now, what about you're sitting there and all of a sudden you realize the seat is wet? So how do you get up there? So right now, we've already got 6, 9 different ways of getting yourself up to standing, right? And this is one of the things that we're always exploring, the idea of using a different initiation, a different intention, and then we can add another component to it so that we have 3 choices about how we would explore this, which would be the quality of how you do it. So just get up like you normally get up, and sit again, and then get up quickly. Good. Do it again. Now that's close to watching the kid near the heater, but it's not the same, but it has the same emphasis to it. Now, do it again slowly. Actually, no, wait. Do it again quickly and notice what you can sense and feel. And do it a few times like that. Good. Sit again, and now do it slowly, come to standing. And feel, is there anything different in the quality of what you're doing or what you can sense in yourself when you do that? Do it a few times. Because the repetition of the movement is not quantitative, it's qualitative, meaning that each time you do it, maybe you can pay attention to or become aware of something else that wasn't in your attention before. Now, sit again, and this time, get up really slowly. But the reason you're getting up slowly is just to sense how you do something. And notice, if your attention, your awareness, goes to different aspects of yourself when you come up to standing like that. Now, it may be possible for some of you that you feel different things coming really, really slowly like this compared to when you did it quickly. In the opening event of this summit, Ivo gave a talk and he did a demonstration about the Weber-Fechner law. So what's the Weber-Fechner law? I'll give you some more information. Sit again. Now, the Weber-Fechner law describes really the relationship between stimulus and sensitivity. So the slower, the smaller the action we do, the higher degree of attention we can bring to what we're doing. And that's a lot of what we're working with. And in fact, the place that we start to learn about when we move slowly like this in a Feldenkrais lesson is more about the initiation, how we begin something. So we're building something from a very different foundation. So, of course, we can be creative again and think of, that's not Stravinsky or Tom Waits, right? Is it? That's someone who found a hole and whose toilet was broken. But they did something pretty creative. It's not that private, but that's something else. So one thing about awareness through movement is that it's practicing choices, as I said, outside of the everyday context of achieving something. Because the minute we bring achievement into something, it influences greatly how we go about doing it. And that's not a bad thing. We need to achieve things in our life. But if we really want to learn more about ourselves, one of the ways to do something like that is by going slowly, by finding out, by being able to make more distinctions and feel more kinds of differences, so that when you go home or when you're at home and you get out of your chair at some point, or you get off of the toilet as another situation, you might decide how you do it. And you might get interested in just the everyday moments of how you make a difference for yourself. So, this is me talking. I have not yet met someone who I did not see as having the potential to be creative, think creatively, or act creatively. And I can say that I don't make many absolute statements like that, but I believe that to be absolutely true. that everyone has the capacity to be creative in some way, however small it is. Now, many people, like talking about Stravinsky or Tom Waits, many people, I think, have a mistaken idea that creativity has to be art. And they're not the same thing. And in fact, this quote from Scott Adams is one of my favorite ones. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes, and art is knowing which ones to keep. That's a pretty cool quote. So when we think about being creative, it doesn't mean we have to be a Stravinsky, a Tom Waits, or anyone like that. We have to be able to enjoy the process of making a mistake and having something new come out of it. And mistakes, of course, aren't the only way that we can generate something like that. Now, but it is about making mistakes. And then the question is, how do we make mistakes? What's the environment that allows you to make mistakes? Because most of our lives is done in a way that we're trying not to make mistakes. And people are reminding us when we do make a mistake. So, yeah, that's the way it is, but could it be different? Could we find a forum, a vehicle, where we might discover something through our action of making mistakes? And I always think it's really interesting to discover how many inventions were mistakes. Like the microwave. The microwave, they were doing research with powered vacuum tubes, and one scientist was nearby it, and it turned out his chocolate bar melted in his pocket, and he couldn't figure it out. And then, of course, that became the beginning of something else, and how many of us use microwaves, right? Post-it notes were a mistake. It was a failed attempt at glue. They wanted to make a really strong glue, and what they made was a weak glue that could be used over and over again. And it's something we use all the time and something like that. This one I get a kick out of. So Viagra was a mistake. It was made for angina, a heart condition. Now, I don't know who figured out this other use for it, right? But someone figured out that Viagra was good for something else as well, okay? Now, plastic was supposed to be an alternative to shellac. Now, was that a good invention? I'm not so sure anymore, because it's what it's created in our worlds today. I heard a legend here in France that Roquefort cheese was a mistake. A shepherd left some cheese in a cave, and he came back a few days later, and the cheese had gotten all moldy, but it tasted really good. So who could know that? What kind of things are going to predict like that? Now, my brother is a very talented man, and he initially was a wood carver. And he had done all the carving for Ralph Lauren's store in New York City, his flagship store. And it was a big job, and it took a long time, and then it was over. He didn't know what to do. So he was carving these wooden bowls. And in wood carving, they have a machine where you could run a knob over the original, and it rough cuts 12 or 24 copies, like a key-making machine. And then you do the fine carving afterwards. And my brother thought, well, look, how many wooden bowls am I going to sell? I wonder if there's another medium. And he found something called metallic bonding. And that's something that you'll see in museum shops a lot, where there's like a little bronze statue, and it's bronze, but the inside is really plastic. So my brother found a guy who was making this stuff, and what they do is they make a mold of the object, and they paint the inside with metallic powder, and then they pour plastic in. And when they take the mold off, it's metal on the outside, plastic on the inside. And my brother said, why don't you mix it all together? And the guy said, it's too heavy, the metal. It'll sink to the bottom. So he said, well, if you made something flat like a tile, that would work, wouldn't it? The guy said, I don't know. And within a year, he had patents in 20 countries and raised millions of dollars to make metallic tiles. And from that, he's generated other inventions of how to seal these metallic tiles in a way that they don't get scratched or suffer any oxidization. But then it turns out that that same invention seals marble and tile for life. One coat of it. So these are a lot of things that bring us to an understanding of how mistakes can be a useful thing, right? And kids are so great at this, because kids don't care if it's a mistake. They just do something, and sometimes I look at a kid doing something and go, oh, I never would have thought of that. That was pretty clever. So we should all have more of that quality of being a little bit more, not childish, but childlike in the event that we could generate and feel comfortable failing a little bit, not being so good at everything that we do. Now, one of the things that we also explore in the Feldenkrais method are our habits. And in fact, everything I believe we do is a habit, right? And if I ask people, what's something you do that's not a habit, they usually describe something that's something they've never done before, but the way they do it is based on habits, that how they got there. So if everything's a habit, can we influence or change our habits in some way? And this action of changing our habits is like a perturbation to our system, a way to move past the everyday way we do things and see if there's something else we can do that doesn't have to be huge. It can be simple. So we can explore it here just for a moment. So interlace your fingers. So, and if you look at your hands, everybody has one thumb on the top and one thumb below that. And now if you change all the fingers over one notch so the other thumb is on top, it feels kind of strange. And then you can go back and forth and feel, well, what am I feeling that's different when I do it the non-habitual way? And maybe you feel it in the hands and the fingers, but you might feel it in your arms or your chest or even in your breathing. And if we go back and forth like that, we can start to disrupt what feels like an everyday habit. Now, can you find a third way of interlacing your fingers? That's good. So I see a lot of differences. So if you bring the back of your hands together and interlace your fingers, and you'll notice that one thumb is still on top. Now, if you change them all over so the other thumb is on top, even in this unusual way that you don't usually do, you might feel, oh, that's strange. How come I do it that way? What's the reasoning behind that? Why is my habit formed like that? Now, I'm going to give you an assignment, okay? After this talk, when you go home and do stuff, can you find 8 more ways to interlace your fingers? Don't write me. I know them already. It's okay. Okay? But we can do something else before that that maybe is a bigger tell about how we do it. So just cross your arms. And you'll notice one arm is on top and one arm is on the bottom. And people have their arms crossed actually in different ways. Some have their hands tucked into their armpits. Some have both hands on the upper arm. Some have one hand tucked in. Some have the other hand tucked in. So however you have it, change over how you've interlaced your arms. And back again. And do it many times. And you'll feel, sometimes you have to watch yourself, like where's my ring or watch that I didn't just loop right back around again to what I initially did. And I always love it, the intense look on people's faces. Does that help? I don't know that that really helps. But it's part of the process of how we learn to do things. Now, cross your arms again and change them over again and notice, how do you change them over? Do you move one arm or the other or both? And then the next time you do it, if you moved one arm, can you move just the other? Or if you move both, can you move one? Or if you move one, can you move both? So you change over the way that you change over your arms. And already, when I look at the people here in their faces, what I see is an interest, an attention on something to feel themselves a certain way. And that's the thing, again, that we're looking to generate in the Feldenkrais method, to be able to use our attention within ourselves to start to feel things, to notice things that maybe we weren't aware of before. Now, another big idea in the Feldenkrais method, and I'll just talk about a few, is this idea of self-image. So that's a long talk, and I'm not going to go into a long conversation about how our self-image forms or the reasons for it, anything like that. But I think what we can recognize is how often our internal self-image is different than what we really look like to other people. So even cats have a self-image. You know who else has a self-image like that? Chihuahua dogs. Chihuahua dogs will attack the biggest dog in front of them because they have no idea how small they are. But it's not just dogs and cats. We can see that in people. So what's age, right? We can feel old or not. Actually, one of the things that affords us in Feldenkrais is the ability to find the abilities that we had when we were younger again, to move in ways that have a higher quality, a higher sensibility, and something that gives us more pleasure and actually helps us like ourselves more. And of course, that can start at a very early age, because kids are all like that. Kids see something and they just want to play with it and imitate it, and it makes us happy. We see that picture like that, and I think it makes most people smile, right? But most people don't realize that fire extinguishers have a self-image too, that they have a hidden dream to become a scuba diver and something like that, okay? Now, all of this talks about really that it's a question of perspective. So in the Feldenkrais method, we're continually shifting our perspective to see things in different ways, whether it's initiation, whether it's in the intention, whether it's in the quality of what we do. Each of those changes invites a different perspective of how we might go about performing actions, doing things, and enjoying things in our life. So we can see again, what kind of perspective does a kid have when they're in a museum, right? So that's something that if we see it, we go, oh, that's cute. But you know what? If you ever go to a museum and try that, you're going to see the paintings differently. And then we can see that what's really interesting in the museum is the vents, where the air exhausts to and from. And so that's more interesting than the paintings on the wall for kids like that. Who knows? Maybe they heard a sound through it. Maybe they're wondering what's in there. Maybe it's a secret passageway. So they invent all kinds of stories that help them within their perspective of understanding something. Now, I'll talk about Edward Munch later on, but someone had an interesting idea to do that. I was actually looking for another photograph that I couldn't find that was the bottom half of the scream, where the guy who's screaming like that, he's stepping on a Lego toy. And that's the thing that generates him. And then, of course, this is one of my favorites, and I'll have to explain it a little bit. So it's a man in a museum, and what he's actually looking at is the fire hose that's built into the wall. But he doesn't know that. He thinks that's a piece of art. And in a modern museum, why wouldn't you think that that's something like that? And of course, our perspective can change again, because here's someone trying to generate a feeling of something that they want, spring, but it's the middle of winter and snow. So that changes our perspective when we look at something like that, whether it makes us smile or just feel a little happier. Now this one has an interesting idea. This person may be a brick collector and he doesn't care about books that much, right? So that's again something that, well, it speaks for itself, I think. And then, of course, this is one of my favorites, which, if any of you are even a little bit OCD, you might be twitching a little bit when you see something like this. And now, when I go to parties and I see a pie, I do that. Right? And I see, let's see what someone makes out of something like that. Okay? Now, one other thing that is really important in the Feldenkrais method is being in the process. Right? And being in the process is one of the things that allows us to be more in the moment. Now, people say, oh yes, my company, our work, everything, we're process-oriented. And actually, I find that not to be true. I think that people are process-oriented as long as they get to the goal, that the goal is still there, and it's really hard to eliminate the goal, which is why to practice process-oriented things in our everyday context is pretty challenging. It's a really hard thing to do. But in the Feldenkrais method, one of the gifts is you're in a process where you don't know where you're going or what's next. So you just have to find out and be there with what's going on. Now, I can give you an example of something that when people, a lot of people here are in my class here, and I've asked you not to speak out about this, but you know what? You can. Okay? So if you see those dots, what do you see? What's the ants? What else? Eyes. Flies. Okay, what about there? What do you see? 2 dots. Okay, let's go beyond that. Yeah. What? Nostrils, nostrils. Oh, would those be eyes and nostrils? Yeah, it could be, right? And then we can come to here and here. And what is it now? Mouse droppings. Okay, we know what your house looks like. Yeah, okay. So, all of this is telling us something. But look, at every point right now, it's something. And this is really part of the process of generating some creatively. When I was an actor, initially, before I had much technique, I would get a role and I would try to jump to what I imagined that role to be. And then over time, developing some technique, I went through a process that was more akin to this, where if my initial image was up here, I might be going towards it, but I might end up here. So I'd end up at the same level, but in a totally different place that I couldn't have predicted in the same way. So again, if we keep looking at this and seeing, what else could this be? Ah, it's a vase with tulips, right? And so if I kept going, we could have more flowers here and more flowers here, and eventually we could see that they're all coming out of this vase, right? And again, in the creative process, something becomes recognizable at some point, and it generates a certain feeling in us. Now, abstract art, I don't know if it comes to something as concrete as this, but often we see things when we look at an abstract piece of art. So now you know, if I start drawing like this, what is that? No, it's a coffee mug. You're not paying attention, right? So this is something that continues to develop and change in different ways like that. Now, part of this whole thing is that it really brings in the element of surprise. And I don't know if you knew this, that this has been scientifically proven now that they've discovered the element of surprise. It's on the periodic chart, so it must be true, right? It's probably on Google too, because now we know there's science behind surprise. Now, in the Feldenkrais method, we often use imagination a lot. So often we'll do movements on one side of ourselves, and then we'll imagine them on the other side. And that's generally the order, so that from doing it, you have something to refer to imagine it. But I think there's another big reason to imagine things. And this has been proven in sports for decades now, that many people in their sport, pole vaulting, hurdling, before their event, they're imagining what they're doing. They're creating the internal image of it. So in a Feldenkrais lesson, we get to imagine how something might come about. So in that sense, I believe we're practicing developing an imagination that actually leads to something concrete and useful for us. Now, we don't have time here, because, but I'll touch on a couple of more things, okay? So one thing in the Feldenkrais method, as I referred to in the process, is that we're learning to not just be in the unknown, because we're finding out and we don't know what's going to happen next, but we're learning to tolerate the unknown, which is anathema to our culture, because most people want to know. It's really hard to stay in this seemingly unsure place waiting for something to happen that we don't know what it's going to be, like a vase or a coffee mug. So not knowing is a big part of it. And part of not knowing is finding out, meaning the act of discovery. A kid who figures out how to discover something that he didn't understand before is just one of the most joyful things in the world. And in many Feldenkrais lessons, that happens too. That you're brought through a process where you don't know what's happening, and all of a sudden, you're doing something that you never expected, maybe you didn't even know that you could do. Now, we can also talk about things like finding our center or being centered. What does that mean? People talk about this all the time. Being centered, moving from my center, do I really have an idea what that is? Well, in the Feldenkrais method, we can explore that concretely. And in order for you to find out about that, you have to take a lot of classes. So I'm encouraging you to do something like that. Now, one of the last aspects of the Feldenkrais method that's as fundamental as choice is the idea of being able to use our skeleton more efficiently. That we tend to underuse our skeleton and overuse our musculature. And the function of the skeleton in movement is to bear weight and transmit force. And the funny thing is, when we become more skeletal, our muscles are freed up to do different things because the support is coming through our bones. That what happens in our brain is different when we're more skeletal because the muscles aren't as committed to their habits that I talked about that make us do something in a certain way. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is back to Tom Waits and Stravinsky, which is Picasso's statement of inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. Now, I think most people's idea of creativity has a lot to do with inspiration, but I have never met anyone who was really creative who didn't recognize that the creative moment they had lasted for a few seconds and then everything else was work to make that happen. So we have to participate in things that we enjoy, but it doesn't mean it's always easy. And so we can come back to this idea that I've not yet met someone who I did not see as having the potential to be creative, think creative, or act creatively. Now, many of the examples I've shown here and the photographs of things, some of them have a high degree of creativity, like that first chair or some of the other things. But I think it's most important that we look at how we can generate creativity in our everyday life. So maybe you're cooking something and you find out you're missing the ingredient that you needed for it, but you replace it with something else and it turns out to be even better. So our ability to find these small moments of creativity is really what helps us do something. You want to open a bottle, but you don't have a bottle opener. How do I do it? Why, maybe a screwdriver. Some people can use a door to do things like that. But there are ways to do things that seem mundane. It don't seem like, that's not a creative moment, I just opened the bottle. But in fact, I believe that has a high degree of creativity. And probably the best example of that was an old film called The Gods Must Be Crazy. And in this film, there's a plane flying over a very primitive part of sub-Saharan Africa, and the Coke bottle he's drinking out of, he throws it out, and this small tribe of people find it, but they don't know what a Coke bottle is. And what that Coke bottle becomes is a tool and a musical instrument. And it also becomes things that they fight over now, because there's only one Coke bottle like that. So I hope you can find more and more in your life little things that you can go, that's creative. And you don't have to get patted on the back by someone else to do that. All you have to do is realize, I just did something I never thought of before. I thought after that, since it's night here, we could go out to dinner with some of my creative friends. They're waiting at the restaurant right now. Or we could start to look, oh, that's Van Gogh's mug. So that's a shame that happened, huh? You didn't have to cut it off, it just broke, right? And then we have, oh, this is Edward Munch's mailbox. So it's not just a scream, he has a mailbox like that too. And now, oh, I was looking for this page, but I couldn't find it, okay? But when I saw that, I thought, I never would have thought of that. That's incredible. And of course, this is the most delightful form of creativity, because I'm sure that that little girl is so thrilled with the way she painted her toes. And too bad Mommy couldn't do it as nicely as that. And then this is a great one too, right? So this is someone who's going to be a great potter one day, right? If he gets a bath, I don't know. And then of course, this is a ski lift. I think it must be in Austria or something, I don't know, right? But who would imagine something like that? And then of course, now Nikos was here talking at the beginning, but he has a brother named Mattis, and I think these are the two of them playing with things, okay? And then there's the joy of being creative for a dog and a boy too, to see what's out like that. And then of course, the poor mother who came home to this, how could she not laugh at it, right? It's such a stimulating thing. Now this is actually something that they use in the road to block a street, but someone painted it like a Toblerone bar. So don't take a bite out of that. And then, of course, in Italy, that's where spaghetti comes from, right? Or as we think of. And that's a great one. And then, I don't know where this is, maybe Barcelona or something. But when you see that, doesn't it change your perspective about what you're looking at, what something else could be? And then, last, I hope you find yourself, I really hope you find yourself thinking about some of the ideas that I presented this evening, and that could generate a new way of acting for you in your life. And you can do that wherever you find yourself, okay? So I want to thank you we're back to, I didn't know that was there. Don't worry, he showed it to me before and I didn't figure it out. It's okay, so I want to thank you all very much and hope you got something out of this and hope to see you all again. Thank you. Thank you.
So maybe you already got the answer to the riddle? Or you didn't have time?
No.
No, you didn't, Alan?
I didn't have to, I know the answer.
So, anyway, it's a good example, just to finish. This is the solution. It's thinking outside of the box, no?
No, that's thinking inside of the box.
That's it. So, just to give you a context also, this was an experiment, a psychological experiment from 1945, where they actually set up two groups of people. The first group of people they would test, they would give them the riddle and they would tell them, okay, we just want to test people and see how long it takes them to solve this riddle. We just want to measure the time, okay? Second group, they would say, look, the faster you solve this riddle, the more money you will earn. And guess who had the best results? The first group. Yeah, so without the pressure of the results, of the goal-oriented, of having to get the reward, actually people were more open, more divergent in their thinking, and actually were better at solving the problem. So it's a little illustration also of the way we do Feldenkrais is also process-oriented. And during the week that comes up now with the 5 lessons, we'll also get a chance to experience the process more than the goal in itself and see how it opens up a space of possibilities.
Donc pour les gens en français, à partir de lundi, on démarre ce processus des leçons autour de la créativité. Donc ce sera 17h30 en anglais, 18h30 en français. Voilà, merci à tout le monde pour nous avoir rejoints ce soir. Thank you everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for the people online.